The development of System Shock 2 began in 1997 as Looking Glass Studios approached Irrational Games with the notion to co-develop a game. The team members from both studios were big admirers of System Shock 1, so they agreed to work on a project with the intention of creating something similar. There were a lot of issues in the early stages of development because most of the people who worked on that game were inexperienced. Some members even left the project due to disagreements over job responsibilities. Yet still, they managed to finish the game with only a 3-month delay, which was remarkable. The project manager Jonathan Che said that the specific environment was beneficial. He thought the motivation and devotion would not have been as strong with a more experienced group of developers. In the mid-90s, Looking Glass Studio was working on a fantasy MMORPG game called Junction Point. This project was the initial unfinished concept that would eventually inspire the development of System Shock 2, Deus Ex, and Bioshock. At the time, Looking Glass Studios searched for a publisher for this game before agreeing to a deal with EA, which proposed that they make this new game a sequel to System Shock. Months later, System Shock 2 came to the world. The fundamental component of System Shock 2 was horror, along with several other important elements like the incredible dark atmosphere, claustrophobic environments, ominous sound effects, and the clever use of lighting and shadows. Excellent writing and voice acting were also key segments in System Shock 2. The audio logs were quite fascinating and crucial to the immersion in the game, and they are probably the most important component of the game.
I'm detecting massive quantities of some kind of biomaterial.
System Shock 2 was seen as a first-person shooter, but at its core, it's an RPG where you gather experience points, level up, and employ specific weapons and armor to your advantage. System Shock 2 was also labeled a Half-Life competitor, but in all fairness, it was nothing like it. Many survival horror fans thought that System Shock 2 was the best Alien game up until Alien Isolation, especially in terms of capturing that utterly horrifying feeling of loneliness, fears of biological warfare, technology turning against you, and the possibility that the combination of these will lead to our destruction as a species. At first, System Shock 2 wasn't a tremendous hit. It was in between Half-Life and Deus Ex, two titles that revolutionized the sci-fi first-person shooter genre. According to some reliable media outlets like GameSpot and IGN, System Shock 2 was one of the most influential survival horror games ever made. Some might say that System Shock 2 combat is somewhat clumsy, but it still manages to be very enjoyable. You can use guns, melee weapons, and psi powers against enemies. You might think that using weapons is the best option, but they become worse over time, which means that they degrade. If they break, you'll either have to toss them away or spend valuable resources maintaining and repairing them. If you ever played Breath of the Wild, you know what I'm talking about. Compared to System Shock 1, the interface was much better, yet the depth was still present. You could still play those cool screen-based minigames, and they also introduced new inventory management. In terms of weapons, we did have inventory in the previous game, but you could carry a ridiculous amount of equipment, which was not the case in System Shock 2. For instance, a single weapon took 3 inventory slots, so you couldn't carry a lot of things. You could also get implants to improve your skills or increase your stats, but as long as they had power. There were also operating system stations and upgrade machines in System Shock 2. They provided unique benefits and skills that were otherwise unavailable, like extra damage points, additional inventory space, or more implant slots. Operating system upgrade machines were definitely an interesting concept, and you could use them only once. In other words, many decisions had to be made, and they had a big impact on how the game turned out for you. Because of this, System Shock 2 is a replayable game, and every single time you play it, you will have a different experience. Most levels in System Shock 2 also have the quantum bio reconstruction machines, commonly known as the restoration bays from System Shock 1. So if you die, those machines can resurrect you, and you would lose only a small amount of nanites depending on which difficulty you are playing. Speaking of nanites, those are the futuristic currency in the game that had an important role. You could use them in different segments. For example, you could do some hacking activities, you can modify your weapons, or use them in replicators. System Shock 2 is a full-fledged survival horror game unlike its predecessor. With all the additional RPG mechanics, it's much more immersive than the original game while maintaining all the essential elements of a classic survival horror game. I would say that System Shock 2 is in a class of its own, and it's definitely inspired many iconic survival horror games like Prey, Bioshock, and Dead Space. Just like in Dead Space, you're alone in a claustrophobic, terrifying space vessel. The audio logs are sometimes the only source of information, and the radio is used for most communication. Your enemy is a biological terror that turns the crew members into mutated monsters, and all that is under the authority of a single brain. You have a connection with a woman who at first appears to be your friend, but it turns out that she is a member of the system that caused the problems. Your resources are limited, and your weapons are sometimes useless, but with clever strategies and resource management, you can strengthen your chances of surviving. In the game's final quarter, you'll spend some time on a different military ship that is also being attacked by the invading force, just like in Dead Space. So the similarities are present, and there were also some speculations that Visceral Games, EA Redwood Shores, formerly worked on a project that was intended to be a System Shock 3 successor. They changed it into Dead Space and removed some similarities because they lacked the necessary rights. Many survival horror fans also think that Dead Space was much more of a spiritual successor to System Shock 2 than Bioshock was. Ultimately, System Shock 2 is a game that successfully combines components from several genres, giving the players an unforgettable and unique experience every single time you play it. To put it simple, System Shock 2 was ahead of its time. This is a new type of video that I'm testing out on the channel. I'm covering some of the games that I've played that I really enjoy and I think are different. Doing some research into them and learning how they were made and, just looking at some of the speculation around it as well. If you like this type of video, let me know in the comments below and leave a like or a dislike to know that, you don't like this type of video. If you want to see anything else on the channel, like new next era games or web dev, anything like that, make sure to subscribe or, check out this video. As always, I love you guys and keep going.